Hey there, fellow maker. Welcome to the shop. I'm Bill, and this is my Vash the Stampede 3D printable kit. It's like 31 pieces that you can print at home on your own printer and sand and finish to your heart's content and then assemble to make a kit. Well, I've got a couple of them right here. A kit of your own prop. It's got all the mechanisms you want. It does this fun bit of business. Oh, how good is that? It opens for reloading. When you pull the hammer back, it stays back, and then you can shoot it, or you can just keep shooting, and the cylinder revolves. By removing a couple of key screws, the top even comes off to show off the plant module. It's got all the features. And I would be very excited if you wanted to make one of your own. So you can go check out the files, download them yourself, print it at home, and give it a shot. Stick around though, because I'm going to show you a detailed instructional bit on how to put one of these together. There are a bunch of screws and springs and a standoff, as well as a whole bunch of metal pins that are in here to hold the whole thing together. So stick around and watch that instructional video so that you can see how exactly to put your own Vash the Stampede revolver kit together. This is the assembly instructions for my Vash the Stampede revolver. Included in your 3D print files is a PDF with some more instructions here with a list of all of the parts, these pin locations and lengths, those will be important. All of the screws and springs needed, where they go, and a listing of all of them. There will also be a link in this video down in the description to all of the hardware that I use. These are screws, standoffs, and springs. All stuff you'll have to buy to assemble this. Of course, you can just glue your whole thing together if you want to just glue the 3D print together and not have moving parts. That's totally fine. But if you want the whole thing with moving parts, this assembly instruction is going to get you there. I've got all of my parts 3D printed here. I did all my testing in PLA, so if you printed yours in PLA, it should work just fine. Mine, for this part, is all in ABS plastic, which is my favorite because it's easier to sand. So that's what I'll be working with, but it should work no matter what you've printed with. I also have a 1/8 inch steel rod here. I'm going to cut into little chunks. You'll need one of those for all the pins. You could use something else. You could even use 3mm filament if that's what you have to align stuff and hold it together. I also have all of my screws here. I bought a ton of these on McMaster Car. I have lots more than I will ever need, which is fabulous. If you want to source your own, again, this listing will show you all of the types of screws that I use if you want to source your own, or there are the McMaster Car numbers right there. So you can just go buy a bunch yourself and have a lot left over. Also, if you want dummy bullets, I got these from a dummy bullet website. I'll have a link to those down below. But also, I've included my own 45 long Colt model you can print yourself for your model. So it's up to you. The first thing I'm going to do is take a look at this list of pins and cut these out I'm going to use a hacksaw for mine, just to put this in a vise and cut it with a hacksaw, mark them with a ruler. You could also use a bandsaw or a rotary tool or any number of other ways to cut these. It's up to you. So I'm going to cut these down to length, and then we'll start sticking stuff together. I do recommend sort of rounding the end of these over a little bit. It's kind of sharp right there. You could use a rotary tool, which is what I'm going to do. That's one. This goes in the sight. That'll go in there. I got to drill these out a tiny bit so that it'll fit. And this is the only one that has two of these pins side by side. So I need two this length. But I'll cut the rest of these out and then we'll get to drilling. I have my pins cut out and ready to go. I should point out that I'm working with unpainted parts right now. I just printed all of these. Though I will say that for your final assembly, before you glue anything, I would do all the sanding and painting first, but for this demonstration I'm working on a raw kit. Next thing I need to do is make room for the holes for all of these pins. They are printed at the right size, but they do need a little bit of help with an 8mm drill bit here. I'm going to just make sure I get all the way to the bottom of that hole there. And then these pins should be snug, but they should fit. Like that. And like that. And those are ready to go. They will, in the final assembly, get glued up. This part here has a couple of pins that go into it. We'll do the same thing, just clear these out. These aren't very deep, so make sure you don't drill down into the barrel there. These ones do go all the way through. And that would be the mid barrel. So these pins go like this and like this. And then this part goes on top of it. And it should stick out a little bit. That's where these two little parts go. They are different. The one without anything on this side goes in the front. That needs to get drilled. That's in the back. This is in the front. There we go. And if you were assembling this for the final time, you would totally glue everything. The next parts for this fella are this rear tube. We'll do that one first. That's this one here. So this goes in like that, and that gets plugged into here and eventually into the rest of the gun. This long tube, or pin, goes through the plant module here. And then these little guys, you gotta be careful with these. These are easy to snap. Those go on either side. The plant module goes in between these two parts. This one I put on backwards. And these would be glued in normally, but I'm going to just set that in there. Set that in there and set it down just like that. It's a little loose now, but yeah, if you glue that in place, then it'll be all set. And then this is the sort of decoration that goes on the front, and that goes in there, and that'll just be glued into place. And you can use a 5-minute epoxy or super glue, whatever you want. Next thing to do for our pins would be the bottom part here. This hinge gets attached like that. Now this pin, we'll have to wait to put it in until these bottom pins are in. That would be these short guys here. Before all this gets put together, there is one more screw that needs tapping here. That gets attached in here. And this screw here goes in there. And that holds all of this really snug together. Then these parts can all go together. And then this pin can go in the back of there. I'll drill that out. And then these are for that sight. That should be, boop, nice and flush there. That's all kind of locked together. So that's looking pretty great as a sort of assembly all by itself. These pins that we installed earlier go into here like that. And that's definitely going to get glued when you're ready to do that. We do have a couple more pins. Let's do an easy one. Here's our cylinder. That goes around like so. To make this stronger, we have a pin that's going to go through it, and this needs to be drilled out for sure. Oops, that might happen, and that's why I'm putting a pin in this, because it is not very strong. Glue that back together when this thing gets glued. In fact, I can probably install this now. This isn't even going to need any glue. This part can go on just like that. There we go. That makes an axle that's nice and strong. It's going to support this. And this part here will eventually get glued in like that. That's what we have going on there. It's looking pretty great. A couple more pins here. This one here is for the hammer, and that goes into this little bit right there, and that'll get glued in. And a spring is going to go on here. We'll get to that in a minute. And then these two little ones, one is for the trigger, the axle for the trigger, and one is for the hammer. We'll get to those in just a minute. But first, let's do some tapping. I designed most of the screws on here, all the ones that need to be tapped anyway, to be a 632, and I have my 632 tap here. Comes with a drill bit, although I don't know if I'll need it, but just in case your holes are not properly sized, you can drill them out first with this drill bit and then use your tap to add a thread. Since this is plastic, you can just run your tap right through. These two holes right here need to be tapped. These are the corresponding holes for them. Screws are going to go through there to attach this temporarily. I made this part removable so that you can transform the gun. So these are the two holes that need tapping. I also like to go over with a chamfer bit and clean up the holes there a little bit. Just like that. And then, actually I'm going to tap these top three holes. They're going to get decorative screws, but I'm going to tap them so those decorative screws have a thread. These holes are actually too big for the tap, so that's a good sign that you don't have to tap those. These are the shorter decorative screws, the 632s. And these are the longer ones, so I need, let's see. These just get screwed in like that. And these are the ones that you would remove when you want to transform the gun. You could also probably make these screws decorative and put magnets in here, if that's the way you roll. But I'm using screws. So that's the longer ones. And of course, I'll do the same exact thing on the other side. That's the front half of the gun all sorted. Let's turn our attention to the far more complicated rear half. Starting with the receiver. This is basically what everything gets attached to. These little pins here are for the axles there and there. And they should be a little snug, and you may have to glue them in place. I'm just going to drill them out. There we go. That is snug enough that it doesn't. I don't think it needs any glue. The results may vary. Put a little dab of super glue in there to hold it. And then let's tap some of these holes while we're at it. And while I'm at it, let's grab the side plate here. That needs some tapping as well. These are the 3 holes that hold on the side plate. Those need to be tapped. That hole needs to be tapped. That one needs to be tapped, and that one. Then on the side panel here, I need to drill those 2 out as well, and I need to tap this one. This is all set. I do want to clean up my holes with this countersink. I'll do all that real quick. But this will get set aside until we're ready to close everything up. I've got these torsion springs, little springs. That's gonna be the spring we use on this catch here. And I will make sure the hole on this is wide enough to easily pass this tiny little screw through. I'm gonna drill that out. So this little screw is going to go through this torsion spring and then through there, and then it's going to get screwed into that little hole on the hammer. Although I may need to drill that hole a tiny bit bigger. There we go. So this torsion spring is a little long. I think I'm going to trim the end of that real quick. Just going to cut the end of that off there. There we go. So that should move just like that. Then that can go. I need to make sure the hole for my axle is wide enough. There we go. This bigger spring here goes on this part that we made earlier, right there. That goes in this part, and if I hold that like so, I can put that in my hammer. That's what causes the hammer springing forward action, which is great. Next, we'll do the trigger. And definitely need to drill out the little hole here. That'll get another one of our little screws. And then this little poker part needs to have this screw passing right through it. So I'll drill that out a little bit bigger too. And just like the other torsion spring, we're gonna install this one, but that definitely needs to be cut a little bit shorter. And that'll go in the groove on that. And then this part goes like that. And all of that gets screwed into there. And there's a little catch on the back of this that's going to catch the that torsion spring, which gets installed thusly, although I need to drill that hole out a little bit bigger so that it can rotate around. That goes over that axle there, making sure that's on the appropriate side. There we go. And that is how the trigger gets installed. So this part here should be levering forward. And when I pull the trigger, it should do that, and it should return there. Before this goes in though, this part needs to go in, and that's going to get one of our little springs here. And this is where a pair of tweezers comes in handy. There's a little hole in there, and that's where that goes. The tweezers are magnetized. This has a little protrusion on there, and that's where, oops, let's just do it this way. That's where that goes. And that goes in like that. And there's a channel for that to go in. Oops. So this nub right there needs to fit in this little groove down in there, and if it doesn't, you can use a little needle file to clean it up. You may need to do some trial and error on these parts to get everything fitting correctly. That's what we want. Looking good. There. And there is a corresponding groove on the back of this that I need to make sure is cleared out of support material. There we go. So with that in place, now the trigger goes in. And then you close everything with your side panel here. And we'll do a test. Now, this trigger isn't quite returning the way it ought to. Oh, I know why. I didn't put any springs on it. These two springs here go right there on the trigger. Now, if I had a stronger spring, I would use it. But I have these two little springs that I'm going to stack up to make the spring stronger. And those are going to go there for the trigger. And those protrusions are a little big. I could go in with my needle file and clean them up a bit. But that is the return spring for the trigger. And now we'll put our side thing on. And we're good. So the trigger goes, you can pull it back and it holds, then you pull it and it goes. This little poker comes out to rotate the cylinder, and this part drops momentarily to allow the cylinder to rotate. So we put some screws in the side of that, call this thing ready to roll. There goes that. Now some nice and easy stuff. We got the grips here. Those should lock over all of this stuff very snugly with these screws. Those just get screwed in like that. And the other side. So satisfying. Then the bottom cap can go on either way, but it's obvious which way is the correct way. And this little screw goes in there. There we go. These are the parts for the reloading lever. There are these little standoffs. I need to drill these holes out so that these fit in nice and easily. These screws should fit through. There we go. And then we're going to want to assemble this whole thing before it goes on the gun. There is a shorter slot on this and a longer slot. This shorter slot goes on the top. These are mirrored. This little, this part goes through there on either side. And that goes like that. Having tweezers or pliers is really handy here. And I would glue these in. You're definitely going to need to glue those in. Like so. I want to make sure they're very snug in there. And then this whole mamma jamma gets installed on there. And there's slots where they attach on the front there, and then our screws go in there. That should still be able to rotate nice and easily. Now it's really hard to see, but in here is a space for a spring. It's going to be really tricky to get it in there. This is where the tweezers definitely come into play. Also, these springs might be a little long. There we go. That's basically how it works. A spring goes in either side, and that's what gets this to return all on its own. There we go. And that's exactly what we want. All right, now, one more thing to attach here. There's this really tiny, teeny tiny little part, and this goes over the end of the cylinder there to keep it from popping out. It can still slide out now. And of course you can just glue this into place, or you can use a tiny little screw, though you will have to modify this. It needs to be a little shorter, and the head of it is a little big, so we can put it in our drill there and make the diameter of the head much smaller using a file or a sander. A belt sander works really well. But basically we need to make that small enough that the head of it will fit in the hole in this tiny little piece right there. So I'm going to whittle that down to size, probably shorten the screw a little bit, and then we can install it. Got my tiny little screw here. I had to drill these holes out to make it fit, but it does fit. There we go. Then that goes there and gets screwed into place. a little snug. I can probably sand that a bit so that it's not quite so snug. We need this to spin freely, but I'll fiddle with that until it's nice and rotates freely. Okay, we are nearing the finish line. We've got this threaded standoff that needs to go in there, although it's a little snug, so I'm going to drill it out with a 1/4 inch bit. Bring that up. Now this should be able to fit in there. It's a little snug, but that's okay. Let's just do one of these. There we go. So this goes together, and this goes through all of them. And then these screws should fit. These are the only larger threaded screws. They should fit in perfectly. Flatten that like that. Flip it over. There we go. That is our pivot for reloading. So that closes like that, and the reload lever goes over the little catch on the end of the sight there, and that's what holds it to close, so that when you do this, you can open it, close it, so on. Now everything in this assembly here is a little stiff. Going to need to do a lot of sanding, make sure these parts can move the way they much more freely. You'll have to do a lot of tinkering to get all of these mechanisms working consistently, but that's essentially it. Just want to make sure that your springs are all good to go and everything can move the way it needs to. This one I'm going to finish up for the video I'm working on right now. So I'm going to take this all apart, sand it, paint it, glue the parts that need gluing, and tinker with all these mechanisms until they work perfectly every time. Here's one that I've got working much more consistently. You can see that rotates. When I push this, whoops, when I push that, this part that just broke off, that's actually, you can see, it's broken off a couple times. There is a lever on either side that unlocks it, locks back up again like that. You can pull this back like so, and it cycles and everything, which is really, really fabulous. So that's the action we're going for, and like I said, you just got to do a little bit of tinkering and fidgeting and sanding to get all those parts working correctly. But that is essentially how this blaster gets put together with all of its moving parts. You can see that this is sticking. It's not quite there yet, but that is the basics. That's how this whole thing goes together. I hope you enjoyed that look, and I hope you enjoy putting together your very own at home. Thanks for watching. Thanks for picking up the kit if you got it. Links to the kit and all the tools and materials I use are down in the description of this video. That'll wrap it up for today. Happy crafting. And here you go. This is that same kit that I was putting together, all painted and finished up. The original one that I did all my prototyping in was PLA, and that worked really well. This one was printed in ABS for ease in sanding. Now I did have to tinker a little bit. You saw earlier I was having trouble getting all the parts to work. I actually added, if you look, a tiny bit of styrene under the catch here, so I had a little more range so it could grab the closing mechanism. For whatever reason, just this print, these pieces didn't fit together as well as this one. Could be because I did this in ABS and this in PLA, but I did have to tweak that a tiny bit. And I did put another little piece of styrene on here to make this be able to reach a little bit more as well. So it's just a couple of examples of some things you may have to tinker with a little bit to get the mechanism working correctly, but it does. Makes that sound when you spin it. Very satisfying. And of course it does all the pew pew. Very fun, very satisfying build to put together. I hope you enjoy putting yours together. Thank you so much for picking up the kit. If you did, I appreciate it a whole bunch. And I'm excited. I'm excited to see more of these out in the world. If you do make one of these, of course, send me a picture. I'd love to see it. And we'll catch you in the next build. Thank you.